We've had protocol, and then we'll briefly just talk story, share with you why fast foods, and when are weeds not weeds. And then we will go through what's in your kit.
Okay, so right now, can you all see me? I'm going to go back and forth between a slideshow so I can show you some things I don't have the specific plant part of, and myself. Again, kakahiaka no. It's so wonderful to see all of you here today. I'd like you to reach into your kit and pull out your little uwala. There's an Okinawan purple sweet potato in there. So the uwala, while it was a canoe crop, is actually indigenous to South America. The one that you have is Okinawan, so it's a purple one from Japan. We also have one that we grow here. This is the Molokai purple. The ones I'm growing have a few bugs, so I didn't send you those. I sent you these because they're nice and clean. The Latin name for our sweet potato is Ipomea botatas, and it grows all over in Hawaii. And I would really say that it is both a fast food and a weed, because we can eat the greens. One of my favorite greens are actually the uwala greens, and I have a pot of them here. You can see I brought it in to work with. The greens are delicious, and they grow very quickly once the plant starts. So it's a fast food. Mingwei and I started thinking about this workshop right at the beginning of the close down for COVID, because we started to think about what would happen if our island was to be closed off. We were starting to have shortages on the island. And so we started thinking about it and started proposing it to several different people. I have a classmate who's from Vanuatu. And about 3 or 4 years ago, there started to be huge hurricanes, which were literally leveling the island. And he started, and he's got a PhD, but he's doing agriculture in his home in Vanuatu. He's super educated, but he started asking people to send things that grow fast. And he was talking about the devastation on his island. And so what it looks like when your island gets flattened by food, and the need for you to be able to grow things which are quick, because people suddenly who were subsistence farmers didn't have food anymore. And so he was asking for seeds, and I know I sent some, a couple of my other friends sent a whole bunch of packets of seeds to him. But they were asking for seeds of things that are quick growing, or for starts or slips of things that are quick growing. He was asking for any of the choys, like bok choy, tatsoi, anything that is like a quick growing thing. One of the things they found was that ava actually could weather the storm, as could some of the cassava, where the top would break, but the roots that were already in the ground were actually there, and they were a really important source of food when the rest of the food, like all of your leaf crops, everything, all your trees, the trees were stripped of all of their leaves. And so Mingwei and I started thinking about what was that concept, what were some of the things that we have that grow fast, or things that you can leave in the ground as a kind of food security. And so that's kind of how we came to this. And there are so many plants that we're not going to be able to present to you today, but these are really good basic ones. And it's kind of a good framework to think about, especially if you have a little bit of ground where you can let some things passively be growing, either as weeds or as food security. So that's how we got to this. Okay, we're gonna start. Does everybody have your Okinawan purple sweet potato? So typically you could eat, people usually eat the tuber, as I said. You can also eat the leaf. I want to talk a little bit about propagating it. When I have a plant, especially for the tubers, I actually like to propagate it from a cutting. And I got a white background here so you guys can see that. So this is a leaf from here, and I would propagate it from a cutting. And the way that I would make a cutting is I would go to my plant and I would find a really vigorous growth. I'm going to show you. So you can see at the tip of this, do you see that there's this little red leaf too? That's a new, very vigorously growing shoot of the uala. And then I would just take the leaves off, oops, like this, up to I'd probably leave like the top 4 or 5 leaves. And there's a few ways you can take these slips. You can either put them in water, like in a jar, and then root them. And they root really, really easily. You can see the roots in there. Those have been in there a long time, but they root really easily. Or if your soil is wet, you can put them, you can build, usually would want to do it in mounds if you're trying to harvest for the sweet potato, or you want to be sure your soil is really soft. And what I learned from Kehau Marshall, who runs the Puanui field system, which is a sweet potato field system up in North Kohala, she likes to use 4 slips a mound. She just finds like that's what she's found over lots and lots of practice as the right amount of slips to put in a mound when you're planting them. So, but what you guys have is this, and you may be wondering how this is going to get to this. What I would do is take your uala, and I'm going to just, I have a little hori knife here. I'm going to just cut it in half. Just slice it in half, let it dry for 1 or 2 days, and then plant these 2 ends. And as you look at your uala, you're gonna see little eyes, little nodes or little eyes on there. And that's where your plant is gonna sprout from. So since sending slips, especially the ones that we were mailing across the state, is difficult to do and they wouldn't arrive in great shape, we sent you the actual potato. So the potato itself will sprout. I know some people who every time they eat them, they could just cut the ends off and also sprout those. And from the sprouts, you can either eat the leaves or you can make the cuttings. And once you make the cuttings and they start to grow, within 3 weeks, you'd probably start to have some leaf that you could eat. If you leave your uala in the ground as a weed, you will always have the greens to eat. You may find that your tubers end up getting a little bit, you can see this one on mine has some holes in it. They start to get a little bit buggy. So you may decide that you want to harvest tubers, in which case you need to harvest at a fairly regular interval. And I'm going to show you, there's a couple things I wanted to show you. First, I'm going to show you leaf. So this is one kind of leaf of an uala. And this one is from the Molokai purple. And then this one, do you see that it looks quite different? But it has that purple, can you see the color? I'm sorry, there. It has that purple vein in it. This one is from the Okinawan purple. So yours are probably gonna have a slightly more like lobed leaf like that than this. But also sweet potato completely adapts to the environment it's in. So if it's in a very sunny place, your leaf will probably have less of a steep cut. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now so I can show you. I'm operating on 2 screens here. I can show you my screen. I can show you my picture of what the flower looks like. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble seeing my cursor. Okay. All right. Okay, I hope you guys can all see my screen. There we go. Okay, he keiki aloha na mea kanu. Beloved children are the plants, and really, they're both our children and our ancestors in many ways because we rely on them and they were here before us. So here is the plant growing, and this one is again in a pot. Here's the flower. And one of the reasons I wanted to show you the flower first, because it's very beautiful, but also because often the flower is an indication that you're ready to start harvesting the tubers from it. And so that can happen. It sort of depends on where you are, but I would say about 4 months is a pretty good baseline for beginning to look for tubers. You can also dig under the soil.
Sorry, can you put it in presenter mode? Someone's asking because they can't see. Is there some way to maximize? So if you see the word present up there,
yep.
Try that.
All right, is that better for you guys?
Yes, thank you, Amanda.
Sorry, that I just like to see my next slides. Okay, so that is what the flower looks like, and that is a good indicator that it's time to harvest. It's at this particular time of year, we're very near the winter solstice, which means that it's not a high growing time of year, and none of my plants, even my most vigorous ones, are anywhere near flowering. Okay. And the way that you store uwala once it's harvested is you want to store it in a cool and dry place. You can, if you're trying to maintain your plant for a little while, you can kind of progressively harvest and not pull up the whole plant. You can take some of the ones off of the top if you want to prolong that for a little while, but you don't want to leave the tuber in the ground for too long, or you'll start to get the bugs, and then you can't plant there for a little while until those worms are no longer in the soil. So yes, we can eat the leaves, we can eat the tubers. The tubers are a great source of starch. And the purple, the micronutrients, especially from the purple ones, one of the reasons that we gave you the purple ones is that they're also really good for our bodies. On Hawai'i Island, let me see if it's the next one. Oh, sorry. On Hawai'i Island, we have the Kohala field system. Can you guys all see that? This is an amazing place. It's actually visible from satellites, and Kehau Marshall is now managing some test sites up there on a spot called Puanui. And she's trying to figure out how the ancient Hawaiians ran this huge field system without irrigation, just in interplanting. It's true that our weather has probably changed significantly because we've deforested, but she's working with sugarcane and uwala and doing beautiful work, researching how the ancient Hawaiians grew the sugarcane up there. We believe that Hawai'i Island was actually sending food over to other islands during the time that this field system was going. And there's Kehau Marshall in her spot, and you can see her little bundles of uwala. Do you see the little, how like in that hill, there's like little clusters of the uwala slips that are going in there. If you ever have a chance to go up there, she does volunteer work days. It's a beautiful spot to see. And it's really wonderful to start thinking about how we can regain the knowledge of the ancestral people on this island to continue to use that to feed ourselves. Okay, I'm going to go through all the plants, these three, and then I will take questions unless there's anybody who has a burning question now. Okay. The next plant I wanted to talk to you about is, I called it yucca in your kit because cassava was a long word to write and it has many, many names. It's Manioc esculenta. It's part of the Euphorbia family, and it will look like these little green, like these little sticks, the drier ones. I tried to keep them right side up, and so that's going to be important. I will show you that in just a minute. Yucca is grown all around the world. It's one of the top 4 or 5 starch crops in the world. It's called cassava, yucca, manioc, mogo, singkong. It's grown all around the world. It's an incredible plant because it can grow in really poor conditions. It grows in a mound. I'm going to just walk you through this. So you can see that's the tuber there, and there's the corner of my slipper so that you can see kind of the scale of that. And at the bottom, right here at the bottom of the left-hand picture is the stalk. So that would be the above ground part that's coming out that shows you what that big tuber is in there. And then there you can kind of see how the stalk is going upward and the different tubers are coming off in different directions from there. Oh, and there was just a great Civil Beat podcast. There was just a great Civil Beat podcast about growing our food in Hawaii, and it featured a cassava farmer, I think on Oahu, who's looking at trying to grow enough cassava that we can create a mill. I thought that was really interesting. That just came out this week. Okay, I'm going to stop my screen share so that you guys can see me. Okay, so if you will take out your cassava bundle and look at it. Cassava is originally, interestingly, somewhere from South or Central America. And this is one of those things we find that when we're looking at information about Hawaiian culture too, that there are often different opinions on where it comes from slightly. I read both the Maya and Yucatan, and before I'd heard more sort of from the Amazon, but certainly somewhere in Central or South America. So the shrub grows to be, let me see if I have it in here. The shrub grows to be 8 to 10 feet tall, but if you're in Waimea or colder climates, it's going to be shorter. Mine gets to be about 6 feet. And I plant cassava and I just leave it. I don't eat it all the time. I eat it when I feel like it, but it will stay in the ground and keep producing food. So again, it's something that I have that is a kind of a food security. Sometimes I add the leaves to soup. And the cassava that you guys got, there are 2 different kinds, and I'm going to help you identify. So a thing about cassava is that there's cyanide in cassava. You have to cook it the same way that we have to cook kalo. You have to cook it because it grows where there are poor soils. Sometimes people who are really hungry are growing it, and sometimes they eat it without cooking it, and it actually it makes you a little bit crazy. So it's important to cook it. And there are 2 different kinds. There's one called a bitter cassava, and then there's one called a sweet cassava. And the bitter one has a greener stalk and kind of a silvery leaves. And so I'm going to hold this one. For me, of them would be the bitter one. And then the sweet one has a redder wood, and it has red, when the leaves start to express, it has red leaves. There are different things. The bitter one takes 18 months to grow, and you have to cook it more. But if pigs come through your place, they will leave the bitter one alone, and they will eat the sweet one. And so having both of them is a good option. When you're looking at your cassava, it's important that when we plant it, we're going to plant it directionally. We're going to plant it from a cutting. And so these cuttings are perfect size for planting. And if you just take one stalk and try to keep the upside up, each of these spots where there are these little bumps are nodes, and it will express either roots or leaves from nodes. And you want to be sure that you plant your cassava right side up. And what you'll see is that there's a line of nodes, and then there's a small dot on the upside in the middle of those nodes. And that way you know which side is up. And I will show you. Here's a sprouted one. And so you can see that there's the node right there. And this is where it expressed. So when you plant your cassava, let me be sure I know which way is up. When you plant your cassava, you're going to want to plant it in a pot, and you want to plant it at an angle. To get it started, you want to plant it at an angle. Even if you just put it straight in the ground, you're still going to want to plant it at an angle. And there's really amazing videos of people in Africa planting huge fields of cassava, but you want to put it in, and you want to put it in an angle. You can put it directly into the ground, or you can put it in a pot. It needs to have loose soil. It's really important that you have some soil around it. So if you want, you can actually plant it on a mound, and it will make harvesting it easier, because sometimes those tubers get really, they can get up to 2 feet long, even in Waimea where it's a little bit cold. So that's how we propagate it. And I started some a little while ago, so you could sort of see how it might look. So you see that this is the cutting that I put in, but it actually expressed underneath from the pot itself. So there's 2 different ways. There's this one, which kind of did what you would expect, right? It popped right up off the cutting. And this one took a little bit longer to show, but it came out from the roots, and it was just using the energy from this. It's starting to sprout, but actually the healthier, more vigorous part of the growth is coming from here. It's coming from underneath the ground. So the yellow or bitter cassava, the one with the silvery bark, is 18 months. The red one, or sweeter cassava, is closer to 9 months before being ready to harvest. So the tuber provides excellent starch, and here's part of this is a third of a tuber. And so the tuber is excellent source of starch. It can be used like a potato or like breadfruit. You would first peel it, and you can see that I've peeled it here. And there's this thick, this is what the tuber looks like inside. There's a thick skin on it. So you peel the skin, and then sometimes in the middle, I don't know if you can see right in the middle, there's a little dark spot that's a core. So you would want to cut out the core in the middle too, because it's woody. You could eat it, but it's kind of woody. And you also, tapioca is made out of it. You can make flour out of it. Most often I use it by grating it and making a sort of hash brown out of it. There are lots of ways people put it in soups. And again, it's a plant that is eaten all over the world. It's eaten in Africa, it's eaten in Asia, it's eaten in South and Central America. Probably less on the mainland United States because it likes warmer weather than most of that continent has. The tuber has thiamine, folic acid. Oh, sorry. The leaf has thiamine and folic acid, magnesium and potassium. And so my cassava leaves are small. I'm in Waimea. Even on a mature plant, they're only maybe twice this big. Sarah, who's cooking for us today, has some beautiful leaves from near Hilo, and they're much bigger. But cassava leaf also needs to be cooked a lot. Oh yeah, she's holding it up. It's beautiful. Also needs to be cooked a lot, but it's very high in protein. So it's important to think about this plant, again, as something that feeds you in two ways. And again, it can kind of be a passive thing if you're not harvesting it to use it all the time. If you have room to have a small field of it, it's a really great place to have food security. And I don't put my plants more than 3 feet off center. They don't need to be more than about that far apart and still do pretty good production. Okay. Let's see, cook it. It's super important that you cook it. As I said, it has cyanide in it. Yeah, and also laundry starch comes from cassava, and like most crops that are grown all over the world, you can ferment it. And when you ferment it, it has even more, like a vaster nutritional qualities. I have a friend who ferments the leaves. Okay, so any burning questions about cassava?
People are asking about the flavor of cassava and how long, well, Kimmy, how long do you cook the root or the leaf?
Very good question.
Yeah, because those two are slightly different. And then, so let's address just a quick taste first of the cassava.
Okay, so cassava, very much like a potato or like breadfruit, has a very mild flavor, and it takes on the flavor of the things around us. Like rice, it's a great starch. If we wanted to, and we do, immediately start decreasing the amount of food that we bring into Hawaii, cassava is a really great starch crop. It's a staple, and many places use it as a staple the way that the Irish had used potatoes. In South and Central America, yuca is a main starch. And the amount that you cook it, you can tell by looking at it. It goes from being this sort of opaque white, it gets a sort of a clearer color to it. One of the reasons I grate it is because you're sure that the heat gets into the small pieces faster. If I'm making a soup though, I could cut it into cubes and put it in the soup. And with the leaf, Sarah's going to talk a little bit about it, but you would boil it first, and then you could add it into a soup or cut it up and add it into a stew or into a stir fry. But you just want to be sure that you do cook it first. Are those the two questions? Was there another? Oh, storage. It doesn't last for very long out of the refrigerator, out of the ground. So it's good to harvest it progressively, maybe a week in the refrigerator. It will start to turn brown. This I harvested from a plant that's been in the ground for 3 years. I found a large hollow cassava right underneath the plant, and then smaller tubers off of the edge. And this was just half of the tuber. I gave the other half to Sarah just so that she could demonstrate what it looks like in its whole form for you.
Amanda, would you again hold up the cassava cuttings And so who's ever asked about propagating it, that's how you propagate it. So when your cassava becomes nice and big and strong, then you can make cuttings for your students and for your families and for your community.
Mhm.
So you can imagine, like Amanda says, about 6 to 9 months depending, and then you'll get a nice, several long stems, and that's what I use. I just take those stems, cut them up, and then give them out.
And I like to use these short, like 6-inch nodes. And it's important to cut the ends at an angle. And then again, it is important with the cassava to plant it. You can plant it straight up, but planting it at an angle, it allows the roots to come off of the, I don't know, it's easier to harvest, I think.
Where's a good place to put it in the ground?
It grows everywhere. It likes sun, but it will grow in partial shade.
And how much room does it need between the plantings?
Are you in a warm spot?
I'm in Kona.
Okay, I would give it 4 feet between center. 3 to 4 feet.
Okay, thank you.
If you can mound it or put a lot of mulch with it, that's just good because those, the tubers, as a tuber, it'll make it easier to get it out of the ground. And the same thing for the uala. If you grow it in super rocky soil, you'll get almost no tubers and all leaves if there's no way for it really to express that.
I'm really excited about how excited people are about cassava, Amanda. I mean, even the last time when we did the Hawaiian starches, cassava got a lot of attention and questions. It really is, I think, the stepsister of starches. People sort of ignore it. It's not very glamorous, but the uses of it are fantastic. And I think with regards to more food security, cassava can play a great role for us here in Hawaii.
I agree. I think it's probably the simplest, most accessible thing we can all be growing to provide some of our own starch. It's a very generous plant. It grows in many environments. It grows in good soil. It grows in bad soil, and it doesn't take a lot of fussing once you have it growing. So it's a good plant just to have. And once you decide you want to propagate it from one plant, you can get 50 cuttings if you do it right. Okay, I'm going to move on to kabocha. So this is Auntie Holly at Mala'ai, and you can see rambling in front of her all these leaves. This is the kabocha squash rambling, and you can see in some of the leaves, and you'll see this a little more in other pictures, there are some little white striations in there. Kabocha's Latin name is Cucurbita maxima. And it's a winter squash. Some people call it a pumpkin or a Japanese pumpkin. Something that was really interesting to me is the origin of kabocha is probably actually Cambodia. And any of you who are familiar with Cambodia will know another name for Cambodia is Kampuchea. And so you can see where kabocha came that way. And so they say it's probably Japan by way of Cambodia. So it probably actually originated in Kampuchea. Kabocha is eaten around the world. I've run into people who are Jamaican who talked about, especially the rebels in the Jamaican hills living off of the pumpkin. It's grown in Thailand. It's grown all over here. And it's a really beautiful plant. We eat the fruit and we can also eat the seeds. It grows in all kinds of conditions. It's nice to plant it also in a little bit of a mound. And I usually put a couple of seeds in a mound when I'm growing it. And one of the things that's excellent about kabocha is that it has a thick skin. And so it's resistant to fruit flies and bugs. It tends to be super resistant. And let me see what I can show you here. So you can see there's Holly with a kabocha. And you can see how big the leaves get. Right now, the leaves are small because of the time of year that it is. But you can see the leaves are big. And there's a couple of them and they're turning orange. And one of the things interesting about kabocha is, like squash, it is promiscuous, which means that it cross-pollinates with other winter squash really easily. And the seeds that I sent you are from one that I grew in my yard. That was one of the best ones I've ever had. It definitely crossed with something, and I'll show you the inside of one of the pumpkins from that plant. But it is really delicious. One important thing when you have kabocha growing is you need pollinators for the flowers. The flowers are a big open yellow squash type flower, but you really need pollinators or you will have a giant vine and you won't get any fruit. So you can see the leaf on here and you see the variegation, the small white spots in there. I think what's interesting on this plant particularly is you also see the small white spots on the kabocha. That's a very green one. The plant is also able to adapt to a lot of environments. Here you see it growing on a hedge. At my house, it grows on the hedge. And then the pumpkins will hang down, which is kind of nice. It saves me ground and it keeps the hedge from growing too fast a little bit. It will grow and grow, and sometimes the pumpkin will drop and it will reseed itself. It is a weed that you can eat. And again, it's a tremendous food producer. We find that for pureed pumpkin, you get about a cup per pound of pumpkin. So if you're getting 500 pounds of pumpkin off of 3 or 4 plants, you're getting a whole lot of food. It stores very well. You can store it whole in a cool, dark place, and it will store for easily 5 months. If it gets sun, and it will not last as long. Here is one of the kabochas off that plant. This one looks a little bit different shape. If you look inside, what is excellent about this guy is that there's a lot of meat on there. It almost looks like a butternut squash. It has a really good thick skin. This one is very ripe. I harvested it in November. It's been kind of just sitting under my porch for that time. And then you see the seeds inside, and how we propagate kabocha is by the seeds. I would take a spoon and scoop these seeds out into a bowl of water and rinse out the fibrous part in there. And then that would leave me with these. I don't know, can you guys hear? I can hold them up so you can kind of see them. That would leave me with these, right? And that's gonna look a lot like what you have, I think 3 or 4 of in your packet. Seeds that float a lot or seeds that sink, if you notice that they're different, take them out. They're not gonna be as viable. If you wanted to eat these, right after you clean them, I put a little bit of salt water or sprinkle salt on them and put them in the oven at about 325 and roast them. The skin is not too hard to eat, and they're a great source of protein. You do not want to eat winter squash seeds if you haven't grown them organically, though, because the seeds are bioaccumulators. So if there are toxins in your environment, they're going to be gathered and accumulated in the seeds. If you do have organic pumpkin seeds, they're excellent for you. They're so good for you. They're a good source of protein from the coating, or of fiber from the coating, and the seed itself is high protein and delicious. They're great for pie, for curry, and for just roasting the flesh. And it's interesting to watch, if you grow them, to watch over time how the generations change because they're promiscuous. Are there any questions about the kabocha or kabocha type?
Oh, many. One of it is so funny. As you were talking about pollinators, I was answering it. Well, you've seen this symptom, Amanda, where you have vigorous vine growth and then nothing, no fruit. And usually that is because we don't have pollinators to pollinate. But then you've also seen where there's vigorous vine growth, and then suddenly, almost overnight, there's powdery mildew, and then the plant is gone. So those were some of the discussions on back and forth, and the question about pickle worm as well. But here's one that you can answer. When do you know when to harvest the squash off the vine?
Ooh, that's a great question. I harvest the squash. You can eat them at any time, actually. So if you're hungry and you have several squash and there's a soft, even this sort of, the skin is still soft on the green one, you can still eat it. It won't be as sweet. What I start to look for is that the skin, and this one, I'm sorry that I don't have a green one here, but do you see that there's white on this skin, that there's a kind of like a white film, even on the green ones? Once it has the white film, it's kind of at a matured state. And so it won't be as shiny, right? Because it'll have that white film on it. And the other thing I look for is I look for the stem starting to be brown, just starting. It doesn't have to be totally brown. And you can harvest them at different stages. If the kabocha is in the ground long enough, like if you're in Waimea, for it to get cool, it gets sweeter because the plant, in order to protect itself from coldness, increases how much sugar is in it. And that's one of the magic things about winter squash. Or their Mingwei has one, and you can see that hers is white. You can see that the stem is brown. She has one that has some of the variegation, like the mottled quality on it. For the powdery mildew, that is an issue with kabocha. I would try to, when you're watering it yourself, if you're going to water it overhead, do it in the morning so it has time to dry. Powdery mildew can spread its spores. It needs to be wet for 8 hours consistently. So if you can water in the morning, or if you can try to water not on the leaf. In Waimea, we have the kipu'upu'u, we have the misty sideways rain. So it often gets everything wet. And sometimes we do get a whole bout of powdery mildew. You can use like a mild baking powder, baking soda water mixture for some powdery mildew. Often my kabocha will outgrow it in its early stages. If it's an older plant, something like the disease will take it down. If your plant is generally healthier, it'll be more resistant to the disease and it may be able to outgrow it. One of the good things about growing the kabocha up on a hedge is that the wind can get through the leaves and it diminishes how much powdery mildew you get. That is a good question. I have found, in terms of pickleworm, I found that kabocha is very resistant to pickleworm. I get it on my cucumbers and I don't get it on my kabocha. I do remove the cucumbers when I get, like I try to keep the population down by removing them out completely, but I hope that answers your pickleworm questions.
Thank you,
Anything?
Amanda. Thank you very much. There were some others about growing squash on this shade cloth.
Oh yeah, great. You can plant it at the edge and it will sprawl over the shade cloth. It loves sun and heat. And so if you plant it, I have done this. I actually did this accidentally with a watermelon. You plant it at the edge of the weed cloth and you can let it sprawl over the weed mat so it doesn't take up your bed space. It also is an excellent weed in the sense that you can let it sprawl over uncared for fields around the edges, things like that. It will not become super invasive. One of the reasons we did not send out chayote or pipinola is that it can actually overtake, and it's a really incredible weed food source, but we want to be really careful when we're working with plants that can become invasive like that, that we don't start canopying trees and killing things like that. I've never seen a kabocha be so vigorous that it would do that. And that somebody brought that up to me, Sandy Barr brought that up to me when we were talking about the workshop. I think it's really important that when we are planting weeds we can eat, we're not planting things that are going to become invasive species in our environment.
Any more questions for Amanda? Because I think then we're going to switch to my other 3 that came in your kit. So when are weeds not weeds? And really 2 words, when they're living mulch. So I don't know if when you look at this picture in front of you, my main crop is mamaki. I am a production mamaki farmer. And so I grow a lot of mamaki. And as a production farmer, I have a weekly quota I try to meet. And I can't spend time weeding. Neither do I think one has to spend time weeding. And in fact, a weed is just a plant in the wrong place. And so if you have ever to see my farm, it always looks like this. You know, my husband goes, what's going on? But if you look at it, nature abhors a vacuum. And nature very much loves to have a skin on her soil. So, you know, we wear clothes, especially those of you in Waimea, you wear clothes because it's cold. And some of us wear clothes because we don't want to get sunburned. So there is a function for this cover. So how many times have you seen a bare patch of soil and almost overnight nature covers her with something? So you can work with nature and choose the right kind of weeds, quote unquote, to have as your living mulch. And so if you look at this picture, you can recognize very quickly the squash. So I really use my squash as living mulch. I just let the squash run around, like you saw the picture of Auntie Holly in the Mala'ai garden. I also use my uala as a living mulch, as a cover. Here in Lower Puna, farming on A'a, I don't get a lot of big tubers. And so I either eat the leaves or am satisfied with small tubers, but really I love the uwala as a ground cover. And as you can see, I have that beautiful kind of star-shaped uwala purple ones that just bring even color to my very green Puna garden. And last but not least, I really want to introduce you to an unknown called Hono Hono. Hey, I wrote it as Honu Honu. Sorry, wrong name. It should be Hono. Okay, how do I forward this to the next slide? Sorry, Hono. My mind must have been on turtles. So many of you have seen this. It's everywhere. And they are a very unknown grass. People think they are weeds, but really it's highly medicinal. So again, the picture shows how I've got hono hono, squashes, whatever, just underneath all my maki trees are tagged with the red flags. And so this is the hono hono grass. Some people call it the day lily, day grass. And the scientific name is Comelinaceae is the family, the genus name. And it's a day flower, and you can find tiny little blue flowers with it. And it's so easily propagated. In fact, you don't have to, it's a weed. It sprawls. You can see the roots. And it's highly medicinal for sore throat. You make a tea with the leaves and then you gargle. My favorite way to use it is to take a few leaves, masticate, which means I chew on it, and then I put it where I've been stung. So that's another reason why I want this weed, so-called weed, all over my garden, because as you can imagine, working out there all the time in Lower Puna, I get stung quite a bit. And then again, you can take the young leaves, blanch it, and add it into salad. So this is a very, very, very common so-called weed. I really want people to be aware about and start using it into part of either your diet or healing practices. So just to make a huge shout out to Hono grass. The website at the top of the picture is links to Windward Community College students' research into Hono Hono grass. So if you get that link, please go onto that website and look at what the students, they actually wrote a whole book about this lovely grass and how we can use it and how it's very much ignored and unused here in Hawaii. Okay, so chaya. So guys, you should have gotten a bundle of chaya. And the way you know the top is you will see it's pointier. So this is the magic of not too close to blur the camera, but not too far so you can see. So there are some, the top might have some points. Like mine came a little pointy.
Not all of them. Not all of them had the top point, but same as on the cassava, you'll see the scar where the node is, and then a little bump right in the middle of it on the top. That way, you know which side is up. And we really made an effort to bundle them all directionally the same way. Yeah.
So, and even where what I love is where the leaves pop off, that so-called scar is almost heart-like. So, you know, when you plant it the right direction. So this is chaya, and it's so wonderful. Chaya means life, and mansa, house. So the full name of it is chaya mansa. That's a South American name for it in some of the communities. And it's such a easy to grow, life-giving plant that it's honored with a name called, that means what it does, Lifehouse. And you'll find chaya growing just in little nooks and crannies around houses. The scientific name, Cainidoscolus, means it stings a little. So the word sko actually it's SCO, the Greek derivation with a T in front of it, means stinging. So it does have some sap. If I pull this off, maybe I can show some sap. I don't know. Can you see it's turning white and starting to drip? Okay, so there is some sap, and some different varieties have actually fine hairs on the leaves that might sting you. But you know what happens when you cook it? It's all gone. So just like cassava, many of these plants we have, you just have to cook, 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 cook. They contain hydrocyanic glycosides. So our origins is somewhere in Americas. They're debating. There's some even saying, oh, it's from North America, South America, but really the origin of it is Americas. It grows in almost all tropical conditions, and it's tolerant. And I have my friends in very much like Amanda's story of Vanuatu. It's the same story in the Marshall Islands, where they're really looking at chaya growing in saline soil. Can it tolerate saline soil and still produce the leaves they need? This is a very quick growing plant for me down here in Puna, where it is warmer and it is wet. And from cuttings, you can eat the small baby leaves in 6 to 8 weeks. That's my experience. But I think those of you up maybe where it's drier or cooler, I think it will take you maybe 2 to 3 months before you can get something to eat. The leaves are very high in protein, calcium, iron, carotene, and the vitamins. And this is, again, my interest in chaya very much has to do with it being used in places like Vanuatu, the Marshall Islands, Kiribati, where people are suffering from sea level rise and the natural disasters that are striking more and more frequently. And so can chaya provide some nutrition and provide a balanced diet for people like those? And they're saying that the amino acids are very well balanced, so it's important for folks living in such places. Okay, so one of the main uses of chaya that's really exciting, it's like a living fence. So this is the story of my two neighbors. My neighbor that you can see on the left, so you can see he's basically got this living fence of chaya. It's 1 year old and he heavily prunes it. He eats it. I don't know what else. I think he makes all kinds of things with it. So you can see it's a living fence. It's thick. You can hardly see through the chaya. And in front of it, he's got some baby papayas planted. So that's my neighbor on the left. And then on the right, new neighbors saw that the old neighbor had a chaya living fence and said, can we do the same thing? And you can see they planted sticks, the same kind of sticks you've got in Thanksgiving. So if you look at all these little sticks now that are now leafing out, they planted it in Thanksgiving, because I remember it was a Thanksgiving planting. So in about 2 months, these sticks are now as tall as the mailbox. I hope you can see it. And already leafing out. And already I was telling them, you guys need to start eating your chaya. So it makes a wonderful living fence. Just wanted to show you this tiny little chaya at the bottom. So these are two of my students in Pohnpei. Melanie, if you're on, maybe you recognize them. So this is the farm in the College of Micronesia, and they're working on agroforestry trials. Amanda, the main reason I showed you this is because this is what our friends, Craig and
Neil and Sophia.
This is their little plot they did with my students, Andrea and Edward. And you can see a few of the plants we spoke about today. You can see cassava. And you can see chaya in the foreground. So all around the world, it's a wonderful, wonderful plant to have. So there are many names for this amazing tree. Some people even call it the tree of life, and it's known as moringa. In the Philippines, they call it malunggay. The Yoruba community, I'm not going to try to pronounce the name for it, but it means the tree which grows crazily. I just love it. And in Arabic, again, I will try not to pronounce, it means the tree for purifying. And in Cuba, they call it palo de tambor, again, some kind of strength. There are at least 10 different species. The one we see the most often is the oleifera, the Indian South Asian one. That's the really, really tall one that if you don't keep pruning or coppicing, it'll look like a telephone pole. And this is a baby of it I have here. And then the picture on the slide is the African species, Moringa stenopoliata. And we're really looking at ways to get more of the stenopoliatas out to folks because it's more shrubby, as you can see the picture. It's not so much like a telephone pole. It's more drought resistant, and more importantly, you can grow it where you're higher. So someone like Amanda in Waimea, she has some challenges growing moringa where she is because she's really high up. And so we're really looking at getting more of the African species out to folks who are a little, high in elevation. So here is the tree that you can use for everything. So every single part of moringa can be eaten. And this is latest study. If you Google, if you go onto Sustainable Bioresources, which is my friend Edward Rao's website, you can actually find this moringa trials. But actually, if you just Google this study, the compounds present in the extracts of the moringa leaves. So those of you who've been following COVID, you're going to hear that word quinone or quinine of over and over again. Remember that? So it's found as well in the moringa leaves. And what happens is these are not, they don't kill, they do not kill the virus. So you don't kill the virus. What happens is the compounds change the shape enough on the crown virus. So you need to, our virus is a crown, right? And it needs to bind. So the anthraquinone and the bioflavonoids change enough the shape so it cannot bind and inhibits the infection of the virus. So eat a lot of moringa leaves, you guys, right now. Now it's a good time to really have moringa leaves in your diet. So the seeds, I don't know if you can see my beautiful, see how long it is? I don't know, I'm gonna come back. One of the names for moringa is drumstick plant. Look how long it's like drumsticks, you can play drums with it. And the seeds are beautiful. I will open one of this.
Try not to clarify, Mingwei, that is the seed pod.
Yeah.
That comes off of the plant, yeah.
I'm trying to open it for everyone. And inside are the seeds. This one's a little old. Maybe I can find a younger one. This is what I was trying to show a picture of the seeds. The seeds are a water clarifier. So I'm going to use the word clarify very carefully. So clarify is like when you have, say, muddy water and it's just too muddy, you cannot put it right through your sterilizer. Yeah, you have to drop all the organic matter away. So 10 seeds crushed to 1 gallon of water that needs to be clarified. The seeds will take all the organic matter and drop it to the bottom. And then you have this clear water on the top that you can then sterilize and drink. So again, amazing seeds. Okay, so every part is edible. There are many uses. They're called the tree of life. So those of you who have oleifera, which is the Southeast Asian kind, the one that looks like a telephone pole, I encourage you to just keep cutting it. So that I'm just showing you how I prune mine, I let it grow, I prune it again. So it kind of bushes out a little bit. And on the picture on the right, I'm using it as a trellis, and my butterfly pea, my blue little flower, is growing up on it. Okay, so every part is edible, the roots, the leaves, the seed pod, when it's very, very, very young and skinny, no fatter than a pencil, you can eat the seed pod as well, just like you would any bean. Yeah, you can see my garden, see all the vines, the squash vines are acting as my ground cover. You can even see that little green squash in the background. Okay, so amaranthus or amaranth. So it's good to start these in a little pot, just 2 or 3 seeds in a little pot, or sometimes if you want to do it in cells, but just very lightly sprinkle. The seeds are quite tiny, so be very careful. So just a couple of seeds in each pot. And then when it grows big enough, you can transplant it. But what I've done with mine, again, when a weed's not weeds, is I've let mine just naturalize. So this little picture, my amaranth coming up from the last round. So right now, all over my garden, this little amaranths are popping up everywhere. I've let them naturalize in my garden, so I don't have to keep seeding and planting them out. There are many varieties and colors. They grow well almost everywhere, and they really are a fast food. I mean, they really, really do come up in about, what would you say, Amanda? I would say maybe like in 6 to 8 weeks again, you've got little amaranths like this that you can start already harvesting leaves to eat.
For sure. They say that amaranth seeds, once they're in your soil, they sprout at exactly the same temperature as tomato seeds too. So if you start to see, if you have amaranth growing, once you have it once and it goes to seed, you'll always have it. And so it is warmth dependent. It's just started sprouting again in my garden here.
It's just starting again here for me too, because we have moved over our winter solstice and we're entering into spring. So it's truly an indicator of spring coming up everywhere. Or like these ones again, they ended up in a pot that I was making a transplant. So now they're coming out of a little pot, So again, I'm just focusing more on the nutritional qualities, because my interest in amaranth, same interest in chaya, has a lot to do with food security and getting healthy food quickly into the mouths of folks after natural disasters, or as our soil salinizes out in the low-lying atolls. So a lot of information here, but long story short, it's a great green. And I just simply use it in stir fries, in soups. The Solomon Islanders, they make their own version of lau lau, where they actually use chaya or bele instead of taro. So imagine you got chaya, the big chaya leaf. Sarah Freeman will show you the really big ones. I'm just down to little ones because I gave her all the big ones. So imagine the chaya leaf, then they put the amaranth leaf, then they put what they call fish scraps. So it's just little bits of fish, like not your fine cuts, it's just your scraps. And then they wrap it all up, just how we would make lau lau, and they put it into a pot of coconut milk. So that's really how they eat it, and just again get more and more and more nutrients into one's body.
And so there's a few questions, Mingwei.
Yes. Oh, we're right on time, Amanda. I'm so proud of us.
Yes. Most of them I've been able to answer. Somebody asked where they get hono hono grass. I would say ask your friend.
A neighbor.
Maybe if you just start asking gardeners in your realm, they'll know, they'll have it and they'll know. I would say watch it when you put it in case you don't want it to go everywhere, because it will be hard to get out. Also a question on amaranth leaves. Amaranth you can eat. You can eat the leaves quickly. You can also eat the seeds, and they're high in protein. Amaranth won't, I haven't experienced becoming invasive. It does drop seeds and naturalize. It's easy. It's really easy to get out. It doesn't have a deep taproot, but it will drop seeds and naturalize. So if you put it in your garden and you let it go, those areas that you don't cultivate, you'll start getting amaranth from. Anyone who's probably grown it has experienced that. You can eat the leaves raw. You would probably only want the young tender ones to be raw. And typically also when you cook it, you don't eat the giant, if it gets big, it'll get huge mature leaves. You eat the younger, more tender leaves. It also is great because it brings birds and things into your garden. It's good for pollinators and birds too when it flowers.
I would be excited to learn from Kapua, if you're going to try this in Lanai, if chaya is deer resistant. That'd be really interesting because it does have that milky sap, yeah? See, it's already running down. It does have that milky sap, and that usually is some kind of pest deterrent as well. All right, so this is what I've been waiting for.
Yay.
I just love this picture of Sarah. I got to know Sarah Freeman before she became the food access coordinator of Hawaii County as a farm to school activist. She was the manager of the farm to school program at Hawaii at Hip Ag up in Hawaii. And really, Sarah was the one who helped. Those of you who may not know this, Kohala Complex was the very first farm to school pilot for our state. So we had a lot to prove. We had a lot to show the state that we could do farm to school. There were enough local farmers wanting to support our schools. And fortunately for us, Sarah was there to help really with a lot of thinking about the planting and production. And then not only that, it came to how are we going to cook this? Because many of our cafeteria managers sadly have not been trained to cook fresh food for the students. And so she was really, that's how I met her years ago. She was really part of that activism up there. She's also a trained chef and a food safety certified agent, I think they call you guys, food safety certified agent. And now she's also and always been a farmer with her wonderful partner in Ninole. So without any further ado, I am going to pin Sarah and it's over to you.
Thank you for that really sweet welcome, Mingwei. So we're going to cook all the different things you guys just learned about. I want to first say that, bottom line with all of these greens, just boiling them and blanching them for, depending on the green, the ones that Amanda talked about that, and also Mingwei, that need to be cooked a little bit longer, go ahead and cook them for 10 to 15 minutes. But other ones like the sweet potato greens, the moringa, and the amaranth, they don't need to be cooked as long, and they can just really be blanched. And so with any greens that we cook, they don't really need a lot, and there's a lot of different versatility you can use them for. Honestly, for me, my favorite way to eat greens is just to steam them, drain them, add a little bit of olive oil, salt, and lemon juice, or some other kind of acid or vinegar that you like, and complement that with whatever I'm eating. We'll do that later. The last thing with the cassava leaf, I really was inspired by Mingwei talking about the chaya and using it to wrap and cook with. We're not going to use it with fish, but we are going to use it with cassava in the middle. Again, Amanda showed you the cassava. So for when I've grown it, what we like to do is we harvest it right away. We peel it with a butter knife, and then we let it sit and soak in salt water for a day, ideally, or maybe 2 days. If you're going to let it sit longer than a day, you usually want to change out the water. And then we'll shred it and put it into bags and freeze it. And so that's why we can keep it and have it on hand for when we want to use it. I know that some of you may have attended the starch classes. There's a lot of great ways to make and work with cassava, and there's so many more ways to learn. So what we're going to do is we have about 2 cups of cassava. I'm going to add about 1/2 cup of coconut milk, some salt, turmeric, and ginger that I already have cut up. And then we're going to mix it up, and then I'm going to put little dollops of it in the in the chaya leaves. And I have a nice, I have a pot of water that's boiling. We're going to be blanching a bunch of different greens, but we're going to first blanch it, the leaf, so that it can be more pliable. So when working with it, when it's fresh, it's a little bit tougher, but once you put it in the water for probably less than a minute, 30 seconds is good, you can really work with it. And I'm adding the coconut milk to the cassava because when you cook it, it does take a lot of moisture. We are going to be cooking it in coconut milk, so that moisture as well will help, absorb and cook the cassava. Cassava, you want to be careful about moisture when it's been shredded. It does take quite a bit. So we're going to just take about a little bit more than a tablespoon. I wish I had an easier way to show this. I hope you guys can see it. I'm going to fold the top leaf down, and then I'm going to fold one leaf over. And so we're kind of just going to wrap it, and it's going to end up kind of looking like a dolma. So I don't know if you can see that. And then I'll put these aside, and then I'll just keep making them. So again, I'm gonna put the leaves into the hot water, let it blanch briefly, so that just so it's pliable, and then keep on making them. And you could also add other things like fish or anything you feel inspired to wrap in here.
Oh, Sarah, I'm
And
so
this could
happy.
be-
It feels like exactly what my Solomon Island friends make us. Ah,
I thought it'd be a good way to combine the cassava and the chaya. So I also have a strainer in my boiling water. So just kind of preventing from having to actually pour out the hot water and start over again. So when we make the different things today, I'll just keep on using the same water. And also in the back here, we're also going to make a moringa soup, which Mingwei talked about. And I have a fish bone broth going. I just got fish frames from Sui-san. If you have a whole fish, or you can also go to a fish market and get the fish bones. The nice thing about fish bone broth is that you don't have to cook it very long to get the gelatin out of the bones. And the gelatin is really what we're wanting out of that bone broth. It's really high in protein, and it's really easy for our bodies to absorb. And it also has types of protein that are hydrophilic, meaning that it takes in moisture and helps you absorb and digest all the food that you're eating better. So when you cook with bone broth, you're actually enhancing the nutrients that your body can absorb. And it's also very cheap and easy, nutrient-dense food to work with.
Hey, Sarah, can you let us know how, did you put salt in the water with the leaves, and just about how much?
I didn't put any salt in the water. It's just boiling water, but you could put salt in the water. And that's really, that does and would add flavor. So I have about 5 of them. I'm going to take my pot. I'm going to add about a cup of coconut milk. And this is pretty thick coconut milk, so if I want more liquid, I might just add some water. The coconut milk I have is frozen. I really like using the frozen coconut milk from KTA.
Hawaiian Sun.
So Hawaiian Sun. So I'm just gonna submerge them a little bit. There's gonna be, there's still like a little bit poking out from the top. And we're gonna let that cook for about 15 minutes. And I'm gonna put the lid on, and I'm gonna cook it kind of at a medium heat, let it boil, and then turn it down and just let it simmer for that time.
I have another question about salt I misasked. How salty is the water that you soak the peeled cassava in when you soak it in butter?
Okay. I would say 5 or 10% salinity, but it just helps with the preservation. I don't think it has to be super salty, but it does help just kind of soften the cassava a little bit and preserve it before, and that helps it not turn brown.
Okay.
So it doesn't have to be a ton of salt.
Okay.
I'm a big fan of sea salt, if you can find it and use it. So next we're gonna do our soup. I already have some, as I mentioned, the broth being prepared. What I'm gonna do is saute some onions, and then some ginger, turmeric, and lemongrass and garlic, and get that nice and caramelized. And then I'm gonna add some fish. And then once the fish gets some of that flavor in it, I'm gonna add the broth and then the moringa and let it cook, probably for only 5 or 10 minutes or less. We do have the dried moringa that was provided in your kit. And I also have here some fresh moringa. This is the African variety. It has that bigger leaf. As well, I do have the Indian variety here too with the smaller leaf as well. So I'm going to put both in the soup and also show how to destem. To say the first time I ate and worked with moringa, it was this massive tree in India when I was living there for a study abroad in college. And the woman I was working with, she just went outside and she just was pulling these leaves off the tree and she was like, tree spinach. And so that was my first introduction to moringa. And definitely in southern India, every family has a moringa tree. So I'm going to
When
use
you were in
coconut
India,
oil.
did you eat the moringa beans too? Did your Indian families ever cook with the long skinny pods?
All the time.
Yay! Yeah.
So in southern India, their curry that they eat every day is called sambar. It's more of a sour, soupy type of curry that has different vegetables, and it almost always had the drumstick in it from the moringa and moringa leaves, along with tomatoes and other vegetables that they had. And then you would eat that with usually in the morning or afternoon with idli, which is fermented rice and dal that's kind of steamed into a puck, and then coconut chutney. I think it's one of my favorite meals.
Italy.
So I added about a tablespoon of coconut oil. And since this is only a small soup, this is probably just gonna be, with onions, and when you're cooking onions or any kind of vegetable, whether it's in the oven or in a pan, you never want things to crowd. You always want them to have space. If you put too much in one pan or on a baking sheet, it's gonna steam instead of saute. So it's gonna change the flavor and how it cooks. So anytime you add, it's best to leave some space on the pan. While we let that start caramelizing, I'm gonna open the pumpkin. My pumpkin, this is an example of it being a little bit, still has a green stem. It is ready, but it is a bit younger. But it is the youngest one, or the oldest one I had. I already cut it open, so let's see if it can reopen. And you can also see that since it's super young, like it doesn't have a lot of seeds yet. And it is a softer flesh. This one, it didn't, it took it months. I think it was really dry and we weren't watering. And so it really wasn't fruiting for many, many months. And then once we started getting all this rain the last couple of months, they really started fruiting. And it's interesting, we have a couple of different ones that we planted, and some of them are this kind of white and green pumpkins, and some of them are a dark green. So it's nice seeing the different variety come out from the same seeds. And even though there was a time, like even though we did have a good amount of bees around, the flowers still weren't getting pollinated. So we did do some hand pollination of some of the pumpkins. But again, the pollination, the fruiting rate really went up when it got more rainy here. I don't know. Yeah, some of these seeds are good enough we're also going to roast some of these pumpkin seeds. As Amanda mentioned, when you're soaking seeds or even beans or anything before cooking them, if any of them float to the top, it usually means that they're not really, they've gone rancid or they're just not really healthy. And so it's best to just throw them out.
I think that in the seed shop, we'll probably show about saving seed from a squash next month.
Nice. So I'm just gonna let these soak for a little bit. Add some salt to the water, and put them aside. those are boiling, so we're just gonna lower the temperature. Probably also gonna take off the lid. Then I'm gonna add, now that the onions are a little bit more clear, I'm gonna add the lemongrass, ginger, and turmeric to the pot. Probably do about a teaspoon of lemongrass, about a tablespoon of ginger, and about a teaspoon of the turmeric chopped up. And then also about a half teaspoon of chopped garlic. Next, we're going to add our fish. For this, I'm using a white fish. And I'm just going to get that coated nicely in the flavors before adding the broth for it to cook further. So I have the stock pot here. I have a strainer and I'm just gonna ladle the broth into the pot.
Sarah, will you review for us what's in the pot?
Yes. So in the pot we have fish frames. I think they're ahi. And I also, when I was doing my different prep, so I have like the onion peels, the lemongrass stalks, and also I added a bunch of different ginger in there so that we can really get that flavor developed for the soup.
In the stock, okay. And then in the soup pot, the coconut oil.
Go ahead.
Oh, I just want to review what's in the soup pot that you've ladled the.
I added coconut oil and then onions and caramelized the onions for a few minutes, and then I added the ginger, turmeric, lemongrass, and garlic.
Okay.
And then I added the fish.
Okay.
And then I just added the broth. And again, you only really have to cook the broth for 20 to 30 minutes with fish bones. And I invite you to, save your different vegetable scraps in your freezer or when you're prepping, especially your onions, carrots, celery, herbs. Those are kind of the best ones to save. Also mushrooms to really add flavor to a broth. And it should also last, like you can also freeze broth if you make a lot, but it can last in the fridge probably for up to a week or 2 weeks.
That's a
I'm
great.
gonna add about a third of a cup of the dried moringa leaves. And then I'm gonna add some of the fresh. So with the fresh leaves, you can just pull them. And some people want to remove the smaller stem as well. Depending on the variety, the African, you'll pull it right off and you won't get the small stem, but on the Indian variety, usually that small stem is very tender and you can still eat it, but you can still go through and peel that off as well. But this is a really, if you harvest a lot, it does take a good amount of time to process, but it is a really easy green to process. So we'll kind of have a mix of the dried and also the fresh in the soup. We'll just let that sit and simmer for about 5 or 10 minutes. We'll just keep checking on it. So So next, we're gonna make another coconut-based dish. I really like this, and I did make it for the cafeteria managers at the Kohala complex. It is a coconut curry soup with sweet potato leaves. I did learn that the DOE considers coconut a nut, and thus it's an allergen, and thus it cannot be served in DOE schools. Which I think is unfortunate living in Hawaii that we can't serve coconut. But I'm also going to be adding the amaranth leaves in that dish as well. And again, with this dish, we're going to blanch these greens before adding them to the final curry base. I'm going to make some room. I'm going to move my stock pot over. One day I'll have a bigger kitchen and a bigger stove. But...
Sarah, the moringa leaves you used, were they sun-dried or were they the dehydrated ones? Or Mingwei, were they sun-dried or dehydrated, the ones we have?
Yeah, I hung them up to dry first. I just hung them in my kitchen. And then right at the end, I put them in the dehydrator to get them really, really, really dry because I knew we would be trying to ship it across the state. And I didn't want them to get moldy or anything. So that was my intention. But I just really, if I wasn't going to ship it just for home use, I just hang it, just hanging it up to dry, like, you know, on a wire.
So with this curry, again, it's kind of similar to the soup base. We're going to start caramelizing onions, add our spices, and then we're going to add the coconut milk and then the blanched greens. And that's kind of all it is. It's really, really simple. It's really tasty, and you can just add it over rice or other, you know, or eat it by itself. So again, I'm going to use probably about a tablespoon of coconut oil. Probably about a third of a cup of chopped onions. While we let the onions start to simmer, I'm going to go ahead and add our cassava leaves to our boiling water. So these we're just going to boil and have steamed greens with. Maybe you saw them earlier, but they're quite large and dark green and beautiful. I was really excited to learn about eating cassava leaves. This will be my first time eating them. When I was researching them, I also saw that in other countries, they actually sell them frozen like we sell frozen spinach. And a lot of the recipes came from already frozen cassava. Just going to submerge them in the water. We'll let those cook for about 15 minutes. Our little cassava chaya domo should be about ready. But I'm just going to let them keep simmering here. They have it on for about 15 minutes. But I'm just going to let them keep cooking. They smell delicious. Again, we're just caramelizing onions, so then I'm going to add more lemongrass into this one, probably about a tablespoon. And I chopped it up really finely. I guess I can demonstrate really quick. You know, so this is about the size of the lemongrass that I used. The other pieces that I didn't use, again, went into the stock. To get a good angle when chopping it finely, I cut it in half so that I have a flat surface to work with, and then it's easier for me just to start chopping it more thinly. And lemongrass is another really great thing to always have growing. You just pull from your garden. You're gonna add about a tablespoon of ginger and about a tablespoon of turmeric chopped. About a teaspoon of chopped garlic. So again, in all of these, in a lot of these recipes I'm showing today, we're using a lot of other really nice spices that grow here, and just really making it really flavorful. But again, you know, it can be just as delicious just with a nice oil and a nice vinegar and some salt as accompanying your meal. With chaya, when I was looking at recipes, a really common one is that they steam it or boil it for 5 to 10 minutes, and then they'll chop it up and they'll put it into scrambled eggs, or they'll also put it into their masa when they're making tamales. And I really like that idea as well. Sometimes when I make tamales or pasteles, I'll use masa and I'll use cassava as well as a kind of a mix when making those. And so it was really nice to think about also adding another layer of green. I also have a friend that will put cooked pumpkin in her masa as well. And it gives it this beautiful orange color and also really smooth. So that's another great way to use it. You could also mix the chopped cooked pumpkin and also cassava and make a masa out of that as well. I'm going to add about 2 cups of coconut milk to my pot. And just let the flavor kind of fall. I'm going to turn off my soup in the back. It's definitely done. This soup right now, you could definitely also add coconut milk to that broth very easily if you want coconut milk. Or it's also really good just as is with that really ginger, lemongrass, turmeric flavor. I'm going to blanch the leaves. I am also cooking the cassava leaves, but I'm going to place my strainer on top of the pot still and use that hot water. So I also wanted to say, when we're working with sweet potato leaves and the processing, I don't know if I can find it where I put them, but also with the chaya, and taking off these leaves, you can use your fingers, but I also for me, I just went through and used my kitchen scissors to take off the stems on these sweet potatoes. These are sweet potatoes I have growing just in a big pot in my backyard. My place is not fenced, so if I did plant them in the ground, the pigs definitely would get them. I'm just going to place them in the water along with the amaranth. And I'm not going to cook them that long in the water. They just need to get lightly blanched. Are there any questions while we're letting things simmer?
There was a question if we could get a basic recipe from you.
Yeah.
Sarah, do you eat these crops? Are there some of these crops that you eat regularly?
We eat cassava. As I mentioned, I haven't really had the leaves before, but I do eat moringa. And we're just in process of planting about 100 different ones on our farm. So that will be for consumption and also for the consumption of our chickens. They also really love moringa, and it's also really high in protein and good for them as well as us. I eat plenty of pumpkin. Yeah, some moringa, pumpkin. Chaya I have eaten in the past. We have some planted here, but it hasn't grown yet. We've been on this farm for about a year and are slowly getting things into the ground. And then I do enjoy eating sweet potato greens when we have them. So I've never made this before, so I'm just going to try it. I'll definitely make some tweaks but it looks like it's, with the cassava, and I don't know if some people have made cassava mochi, it kind of it really kind of gels and starts to stick together. So you can see that there was enough moisture. It's kind of squishy and kind of all held together. And so it looks like it did cook really well. So that's good. Yeah, sorry.
It's good.
Yeah, it almost has a really like sweet coconut rice kind of flavor. If you were to tell me that wasn't, I wouldn't know that was not coconut rice. Like sweet, sticky coconut rice. It's pretty much what it tastes like. So it's a really nice, definitely great way to use it. We have about 5 minutes left of our cassava leaves. I know we're about out of time. But I just do want to mention what I will do with them is when I'll strain them and then I'll add, I'll probably chop them up, let them strain them, let them cool a little bit, chop them up. You can also chop them up before you put them into the water, and then just add some olive oil, some fresh lemon juice, and some salt, and eat it that way. But again, all of these greens, you can how you'd use chard in any kind of recipe. You just cook them ahead of time.
Wonderful. Oh, Sarah, thank you so much. There's some just in the chats. Moringa is also good for breastfeeding mothers to help boost milk supply. Thank you, April. That's really, really wonderful. Thank you all again. Thank you, Sarah, so much. Now we're inspired. I mean, again, what our intention during these webinars, our friends, to show, again, not so much like a set recipe, but ways you can cook. Yeah, ways you can cook these foods. And just like Sarah bravely on screen modeled to us, just trying something new with an idea that I put into her head about the chaya. So really, really exciting, and thank you so much for that.
Could we see into your soup pot?
Yes, I'll take you to my soup pot. So
There we
this is the coconut with the sweet potatoes. The sweet potato greens and the amaranth greens, really beautiful color. I'm just about to put it into some rice. That's the soup. It's pretty hard to see, but it is just a brothy soup. Maybe I can put some in a bowl for you guys to see.
Mahalo again to the County of Hawaii R&D Department for your sponsorship. And let's close with our Oli Mahalo. Uhola ia ka makaloala. Puai ke alohala. Kukai ia ka haloala. Pavehi e mai na lehua. Mai ka hoku ia ka halavaila. Mahalo ke akua. Mahalo e na ka puna la eia. Mahalo me ke alohala. Mahalo me ke alohala. Mahalo, everyone. Thank you so much for spending your morning with us.